So I think we're going to see what it's interesting you put it that way, that we go through this cycle of, you know, the sky is falling and then we go back to our normal lives because that's going to happen again and again until it can't happen and we're in real trouble, right? So I mean, the issue is we find mechanisms of resistance that get us very concerned about the efficacy of our current antibiotics, but the reality at the time is that the clinical rate of that resistance might not be enough to really impact meaningful change. But if I think about the fluoroquinolone antibiotics and us kind of globally reaching, I don't know, somewhere on the order of 33% resistance, um, that now gets really problematic for clinicians being able to say, you know, if there's a 1 in 3 chance that my patient won't respond to this antibiotic, now we're actually kind of really in a crisis. So we can talk about a post antibiotic era, but I think the reality is that the rates of clinical infections of these multi-resistant bugs, especially in developed nations, isn't quite at the point where, you know, there's going to be immediate kind of COVID-19 pandemic alarm to these. Dale, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's serious,
Correct.
although it gets ignored. The bacteria accumulate mechanisms of resistance and they don't lose them, but they slowly acquire different mechanisms of resistance. Um, you know, Enterococci, I think, probably the most serious of the gram positive organisms. Everybody thought it was going to be vancomycin resistant Staph aureus, but it's the enterococci, and they're already resistant to vancomycin, but now they've been accumulating mechanisms of resistance against common antibiotics, and really they're on the verge of no longer being effective. And that's a class where the antibiotics of last resort are already ineffective. And so we're on the cusp of something that could be really serious. And so the time to act is now. Really the question is just what mechanisms are in place for us to be able to make headway on this. To put it into perspective, it's just not economically feasible for large companies to take it on as a problem because of the economics of it. Very
I'll
difficult.
add to that. I'll interrupt Dale in that and say it is the economics, but I think it's also the difficulty of it, right? So if we think about how challenging antibiotic drug design and medicinal chemistry has been, and I'm a company thinking about my rate of return on discovery, not only am I getting a poor return, but my discovery is poor. And so I think scientifically and economically, there are both problems with the discovery pipeline if you're a big pharmaceutical company. Sorry, Dale, back to your
No, that's
point.
exactly. And then for the individuals and academics, it's actually where do you secure the support in order to conduct the studies you'd like to do. And um, early stage things aren't as expensive, but if you actually think about true preclinical development of antibiotics and the work that goes into that, it becomes increasingly expensive and challenging to do in academics, unlikely to be supported by industry, not very welcomed at funding institutions unless there's something unique about the technology that you're applying and things. But it's a little bit challenging to engender enthusiasm for the science that could have an impact. Not impossible. I don't mean to be critical actually, but it is challenging actually.
So as a human, an individual, and a father, I would like to hope that we will have a magic bullet with no possibility of resistance. And I hope myself or Dale are the ones that discover that. However, I think Darwin kind of spoiled this for us. And as long as life coexists, there will be competition and there will be evolution. So I think that we can find new mechanisms, new targets, new therapies that greatly reduce that competition, but I don't think it's something that will ever go away. I hope I'm wrong on that, and I'm sure people will disagree with me, but life is life.
Yeah, there are some intriguing things that are emerging
Mhm.
that could change the face of this problem. Um, and I don't mean to toot our own horn, actually, but I will give you an example, and it may or may not be something you'd want to use. Um, but what we've been working on is recapturing activity for vancomycin resistant organisms with vancomycin, that is changing the structure so it recaptures activity against the resistant organisms and maintain activity against sensitive organisms. But through the years, there have been discoveries of peripheral modifications on the molecule that increase potency that are really exciting in the sense that they actually add to the potency by virtue of adding additional mechanisms of action that weren't present in the original molecule. And in our last efforts, what we were able to do is add two of those peripheral modifications, add two additional mechanisms of action to the original vancomycin mechanism of action. So you have a molecule that has three independent and synergistic mechanisms of action built into a single molecule that is not only extraordinarily potent, but is resistant to evolving resistance because as an organism makes a change to try and get around one of the mechanisms of action, there's still two others that are left to kill the organism. So it never propagates. You could imagine doing that with a combination therapy, three different drugs, three different mechanisms of action. That combination could work better than each of the antibiotics individually. So there are some ways to maybe create what I would call durable antibiotics or antibiotic combinations that could have lasting clinical lifetimes, but it hasn't been pursued as extensively as one would think. It's a little bit more common in the antiviral space where combinations of drugs and combinations of mechanisms of action are used to address not only efficacious activity against the virus, but to sort of squelch the emergence of resistance at the same time. So the same sort of concepts could be applied to antibiotics. And I personally like the idea of creating a single molecule with independent mechanisms of action and creating what we call durable antibiotics. Um, but that's just one example. So there are some exciting developments that at least could be pursued in the future going forward.
Well, I think what you touch on in terms of your durable antibiotics is really important and touches at a big problem with antibiotic drug discovery in the sense that why haven't combination therapies really emerged as the tool in our arsenal against drug resistant infections? And it turns out that's a really hard problem because antibiotics have such cool and rich kind of medicinal chemistry that, for example, the pharmacodynamics of any drug could be completely different. And if those don't line up for efficacy, they essentially become incompatible. So Dale's idea of incorporating multiple actions into one drug, which would hopefully have a single pharmacodynamic kind of driver, gets really interesting and is very powerful for addressing this problem. But antibiotics, as we know, have to be used at very high concentrations relative to antivirals or anti-cancer agents. And so there's a lot of problems with pharmacodynamics and toxicology associated with high dose antibiotics kind of given in combination. So he's on to something, very exciting and interesting there in terms of the multi-drug approach. I think there are, other really exciting technologies emerging around phage technology and kind of genetic stuff that I think we have yet to understand the resistance kind of problems that will emerge with those. Right, phage display has been, or not phage display, but phage therapy has been thought of as a cool tool where we get viruses to attack bacteria and kill the bacteria for ages, but there's no FDA approved kind of phage therapeutic. There are a number of reasons for that. But again, that's using a virus to kill a bacteria, and that's life that's been around on this planet for hundreds of millions of years, and they both managed to find a way to survive. So we're always going to be fighting that, but I think that we will come across these tricks, and not only in the drug discovery world, but also the management side of things, right? So how we actually use antibiotics clinically, the stewardship aspects, all of those hopefully will become kind of better as a society at controlling the use of antibiotics and making them last longer.